Okay, good morning. So we continue our journey through Seder Shtalshlus, which is the name used, especially in Chassidus, for the entire, what is often called the cosmic order. Seder being order, Shtalshlus being the progression, like a shalshelis, which is like a chain of events that goes from the highest levels to the lowest levels, essentially a logical infrastructure, because that's how God chose to create the world, that things have a logical structure and infrastructures, whether it's in Kedusha or in Yani Chayil. There was an order of how they built a Mishkan, and there's an order how we build homes and we build businesses and we build any type of structure. And it's a step-by-step process. And that's all emulating the process, the way the Eibishter put it into place, that he wanted a logical structure. Not that he needed it, he could have created Yesh Mayin, and you have everything in existence as is, but for us to make sense of it, and for us to, most importantly, emulate it, and retrace the steps and reconnect to Elikus, to godliness on any level, you have to have all these steps. That's how you climb a ladder, like the ladder of Yaakov's Cholim, had 4 rungs, which correspond to the 4 stages in davening. You don't jump from Moedani to Shemoneh Esrei. You start with Birchas HaShachar, and then Pesukah de Zimra, and Birchas Krishma, and Shemoneh Esrei. Chassidus explains the 4 stages here. And the same thing in every Aveda in the Mishnah, Ben Chomesh LeMikra, Ben Esrei LeMishnah, Ben Chamesh Esrei LeGemara, etc. So it's an orderly progression. That's the only way that you can really make a Dira B'Tachtenim that's also Begidri Tachtenim in a way that makes sense to us, that we can internalize this. So just a few words on the word Seder Shtalshlus. But we began the beginning of the year all the way from Lifnei Tzimtzum, and moved our way slowly downward. And now we're in the middle of the Sefiros of Atzilus. So I went through the Lifnei Tzimtzum, and then the Tzimtzum, and Tzimtzum Kipshute, and the Shittas, as well as the Shimu, and the Kav, Makif and Pnimi, the Elam of Ak, Odem Kadmin, and then Akudim, Nukudim Toyu, and Vrudim, another word for Tikkun or Atzilus. And we discussed what Atzilus is, and then specifically the Sefiros of Atzilus, starting from Chesed, went through Chochmah, Bina, Das, then Moichin and Midas, and we began with Chesed 2 weeks ago. Last week was a Lag Baimer special, and this week I'm going to continue with Gevurah. So, as I've been doing each week, in each piece of this so-called puzzle, each step of the way, what's critical to understand, the more above all, and that's not always emphasized when you learn it. Even in the Maimorim, it's considered to be something a given, like the Allah, certain things the Maimorim don't spell out, they assume that we already know it. And that is, firstly, the necessity for each step of the way. Why do you need it? If you didn't have Gevurah, or if you didn't have Chesed, you didn't have Toyu, you didn't have Ak, how would existence be different? One of those, my nafkamina, or my benayu, Lashon ha'nigla. And the second thing is, how does it manifest in Avodas Hashem? Meaning, how does that level help us in our Avodah, whatever it is, ben Odin l'chavere or ben Odin l'mokim. So, and of course there's a need to understand the Darga itself, like in this case we'll talk about Gevurah. Another thing I want to point out that I've also been emphasizing, that there's one of the big principles of Chassidus is the concept of microcosm, macrocosm, or in the language of Chazal, Elam Kotten Zeh Adam. That there's an Elam Gadol, which is sometimes called Adam Gadol Zeh Elam, and there's Elam Kotten Zeh Adam. That everything that is in the big picture also you find in the small picture. We call like a hologram in technology. So this big picture can be reflected many times in smaller pictures. Like, for example, we talked about there's Abiyah de Klolos, Abiyah de Protis. Atzilus B'ri Yitzira Asiyah de Klolos is a macrocosm, with Atzilus de Klolos being before the Tzimtzum and Asiyah the klal being Atzilus B'ri Yitzir Asiyah the pratis of microcosm. Why is that so vital? Because also in the context of Achdus Hashem and our relationship, when you have something me'ein within you, like each human being, Medaber has also Chai, Tzemeach, and Daimon within us. Even a Kohen has also the level of Yisrael within him. And the same thing, everything, there's a Skalulus. So that means you can work on that Madrega within yourself and then grow and reach higher Madregas. So it's a vital component. So the same is true with the Sefiros, that besides the role of Chesed and the role of Gevurah, they also have a klolosdika role in the whole Seder Ishtalshlus, as I shall explain. So being that we discuss Chesed, which is of course Kava Yamin, because the Sefiros, as we also discussed, structured Zelamatim is the Sefiros have Chacham Bina Das Chesed Gevurah Tiferes Netzach Yisei Malchus, but there's also the way they're structured in the scheme of a human being, right, left, and center. Like we say, a human being is not just a straight line. We have a right side, a left side, and a center. There's the right brain, left brain, center brain. There's the right arm, left arm, the heart, the center. And the same thing on the right leg, left leg, and the center of the body, which is the Mishkan as well. The three things, Kodesh, Kadashim, Kodesh, and then the Azorah, the El Moed. And in the Kodesh, you also have three, the right and left and center. The Mizbeach in the center, and the Meneda to the left, and the Shulchan to the right, which also reflects the structure. So Chesed is Kav Yamin. In that case, similar to Chacham, which is on the right side, and Bina is on the left, and Gevurah is on the left as well. With Tiferes being in the middle, like Das, and then like Yesod, and like Malchus. So that tells you right away that Gevurah is like the alter ego, so to speak, like the mirror image of Chesed, but another extreme. So if Chesed is free-flowing, which is literally what Chesed means, kindness, love. What is kindness and love? It's all about giving. Chsadim, the middle is Chasadim. You're giving. It's a flow. Chsadim l'mayla, Chsadim el-yenim, Chsadim l'mata. Is always that type of flow. Gevurah, on the other hand, if Chesed is like the flow, Gevurah is the restraint, or the discipline, or the discretion. These are all good words to be used. Even though the very word Gevurah means strength, Gevurah is also from the word din, which we'll talk about shortly. But all of those all fit under the rubric, all fit on the same category of restraint, of withholding. Whereas Chesed would be giving, Gevurah would be withholding. In simple terms, we all understand it very well. When you love somebody, you can't just have Chesed bli gvul. Chesed has to have boundaries. If a person, for example, will love, they could also overwhelm, and they can drown somebody else and suffocate them with love. Just like rain is called Gevurah's Kshamim, even though seemingly Kshamim is Chesed. It's water, and it's Brachim L'mayla, and yet it's called Kshamim, Gevurah's Kshamim, because it has to come down in raindrops. If it comes down like a flood, like the Gemara says in Tainus, it says, Reif Teva En Yechem L'Kabel, when Cheni HaMagel prayed for rain during a drought, started pouring, and a flood can destroy the field just like a drought can, by doing the opposite, by too much water. So you had to have a second tefillah, because Reif Teva En Yechem L'Kabel. In other words, Gevurah is necessary. If Chesed is like the gas, Gevurah is like the brakes. So any healthy, balanced Chesed is going to always have to have Gevurah, Sheba Chesed. Or B'chlal Gevurah that counters, in the language that we use sometimes in context, let's say, of din, Gevurah is din, then Chesed would be schus. So Chesed, you'd say, if there's someone who's in a din Teira, or before Sanhedrin, before a Bezdin, and schus would be Chesed, that person is innocent, and Chayiv, that's Potter or Chayiv, would be Gevurah, Chayiv. So din also is connected to that. In the Shemus, Chesed relates to Kael, and Gevurah to Elikim. Like Rashi says right at the beginning of Chumash, it's Midas Hadin, Elikim. The name that Eibishter uses when he's Metzamtzim, or when he's sitting B'din. And din is not Chesed. Din is the opposite. Din is, you're looking very sharply and very, with deep focus and introspection at a person's behavior. You say about Shammai and Hillel, that Hillel comes from Chesed, so he was more lenient. Shammai was related more to Gevurah, so he's far more stringent and strict. So these are the two, this is principles that you've heard many times and quite easy to understand with these two midas at least. And that you need the balance between both of them. As far as the Sefiros go, remember the Sefiros we're talking here, from there, Nishtalshel Mehen, from the Sefiros you have it evolves into the Keiches HaNefesh in the language of the Alter Rebbe and Peri Gimel. That Esa Keiches HaNefesh of the person, the 10 faculties, Nishtalshel Mehen, evolve from the 10 Sefiros. So the Sefiros is basically the divine attributes, is the Eibishter's so-called Midas Elyenis. And then from that comes the Midas that we call Chesed and Gevurah. What I just described can be applied to both. There's the Chesed L'mayla, the Chesed L'mata. Same thing with Din L'mayla and Din L'mata. But when we talk about the Eibishter, I want to talk about that because we're talking about Atzilus now, not so much in Midas Adam, even though it's parallels. So what is the role of Gevurah in contrast to Chesed? So we say, Elam Chesed Yibona. The Eibishter created the world with Chesed. If he didn't have kindness, Ki Chafetz Chesed Hu. Chassidus brings very often the language that the Eibishter created the world because it's etzem hatev, teva hatev lahetiv. Another way of expressing it. Chafetz Chesed wants to do Chesed. I'm not getting into whether that's the ultimate reason. The ultimate reason is Sava Kadosh Baruch Hu, but there's that expression Chesed. However, the challenge is if the Eibishter just allows his Chesadim to flow, just like everything in Elikus, Erein Sof is Bli Gvul. And Bli Gvul, in the language of the Arizal, right in the beginning of Eitz Chaim, the most famous Arizal we all know, that B'tchila Erein Sof Mamala Kol HaMetzias V'lo Haya Nesinis Malkum Klal Lo Haya Nesinis Malkum Le'elam is Klal. There's no room, just like a teacher. If a teacher just in his chesed wants to just share everything he knows, a brilliant teacher, even in human level, even a teacher that's Gvul, he would completely overwhelm students. So therefore, the teacher employs, that's the Moshe of the Alter Rebbe, in this case, the Eibishter employs another midah of his. Not just Chesed, Gevurah. Gevurah is the midah of Tzimtzum and Helen. And Din, to withhold or to conceal. And that's the root of really where Gevurah of Atzilus is rooted. It's rooted in the Koyach HaHelam of the Eibishter. So if Chesed is the Koyach HaGili, Gevurah is the Koyach HaHelam. And there you have the macrocosm. We're not just talking about Chesed and Gevurah. And ultimately it's going to evolve into two distinct Sefiros in Atzilus. Midas Elyenis, divine attributes. But in the highest levels, this is basically Koyach Legalis and Koyach Lehailin. So the Eibishter has both Koyches. It doesn't have to be Megala. As it says, the Lashon Chassidus, Lo Ze'ikir Alakush Nesava Memena Oyer. The Eibishter is not defined by Oyer. Shemesh was created l'hoyer ala haaretz. The sun has no other purpose but to shine. Chaz v'shalom to say that the Eibishter, because Oyer comes from him, Chassidus makes a big fuss about this, not muchlich l'hoyer, b'chlal not. There's not even muchlich to be a moyer. That's also a beratzon. But once he does choose to be to Oyer, he also employs the second half, which is the koyach to be ma'ileh. I'm not going to go now into the levels. Some places Chassidus talks much about how the koyach hahelam is deeper than the koyach hagili. Like you see, a chacham is a chesiyog l'chacham shtike, that a chacham takes more effort to be quiet than to speak. When someone has something to say, it doesn't take much effort to speak. To control himself and restrain himself takes a lot more effort. You see, b'peil mamish. Like we used to be told in yeshiva, the joke, that the Mishnah says, Yog l'chach mishtike. So someone has the question, if that's the case, why is the Mishnah Megala the saw that way? A sheita, who's not a chacham, will know the secret. He'll be quiet and everyone will think he's a chacham. So the answer that I heard from Rabbi would tell us, he'd say, aber kann sich nicht einhalten. Since he's not a chacham, he can't control himself. Even though he knows the chazal, he won't be able to stay quiet too long. So b'mela he'll be Megala partzufe, so to speak. He'll Megala his personality. Anyway, but going back to B'peil Mamish, Tika takes more effort. So in many ways, Helam has a deeper root. That's where you have the Lashon Koyach Helam, Helam Ha'atzmi, and so on, has a deeper root than Chesed. This is also, I don't know if it's an Agav, but I might as well say it. It's connected to Lag B'Omer as well, the story with Rabbi Lozer, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi sends his son to go get brachas, the most moed cotton, to get brachas from the Bnei Marava, the Talmid Chacham in the West. And he comes there, and he's appalled to hear, instead of giving him brachas, they gave him klolos, the worst possible curses. Comes back to his father, and he says, they cursed me instead of blessing me. And he says, what'd they say? And the Gemara elaborates the things they said, and Rabbi said the opposite. These are really brachas. So the big question is, why do they have to put it in that language? So there's different answers given in Alpinigla. The Alter Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, look at the Torah, B'chukesai, and the Teichacha talks about that the real klolos and the Torah are really brachas, like the story of the Mittler Rebbe, that when the Tata lane had no brachas. So why then is it the language of klola? So let us say the bracha, because the bracha is so deep it can't be expressed in the keli of Chesed, because the keli of Chesed is mugbal. So Helen could be megala more than Hengili, paradoxically. So in many ways, Gevurah has a strength that even Chesed doesn't have. I'll talk about that a little more soon. Just wanted to point it out because we're talking Lamaila. So here we have two kavim. They're not two kavim. They're both, if you go all the way to the Shadish, in the biggest macrocosm, as I said, Keichi lahoyer, Keichi lahailim, or sometimes the expression is Yecholte lahoyer, Yecholte sheloi lahoyer. So in Yechelis have atzmus. Yechelis, and Yechelis can be divided. It just, in our language, you say God has the capacity to do anything, so we have to use some words. So we say the Yechelis to radiate, the Yechelis to be megala, the Yechelis to not be megala. That's the ultimate root of Chesed and Gevurah. So all the way down here in this world, when there's Chesed, it's rooted in the Yecholte lahoyer. When there's Gevurah or Helam, it's rooted in the Keiche Shalei lahoyer. And unfortunately, as we shall also discuss, when there's enough Helamis vestadim and it's nishtalshal, Gevurah's the Kedusha could end up becoming Gevurah's koshes of the worst type. So we say that we live in a world, Elam Hazeh Gashmi, is a world, Shekol, Dake Elam is koshim v'roim, as the Alter Rebbe brings from Eitz Chaim and Tanya, Perek Vov, Perek Zayin, and that the Shem Gevrim Bey, the point of Molek Klippes v'sitra achre, Chesh Kofle Mechupel, in the language of Perek Lamed Vov. All that is a stalshel from Gevurah, but not l'chatchila, because Gevurah, but etzem, is just the Eibishter's kayach to not be meir. However, when it goes through his stalshel, it's many, many, many levels. And the way language of Chassidus, and the Rebbe repeats it many times, Halamas v'esteirim mishtalshlus adein sof of parsoyes, mesochim, and so on, it could ultimately end up being a helam that is not a positive helam, that leads to all the tzoras that we have in Golas. So you see from the Gevurah has both sides. On one hand, it's keich Gevurah shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Say hakeil agadol v'agibber. The Eibishter is a gadol, which is Chesed, and he's also a gibber. That's a positive attribute. But it also has the capacity to go to the darkest place as well, which we'll talk about as well. Chesed, on the other hand, even though there's also Chesed the Plishtim and Chesed the Lumazeh, like Ishmael, now with too much Chesed, as I said before, can flood. It could also destroy. But it's never going to be as harsh as Gevurah's. That's why it actually says in Chassidus that, interesting, that the Golas under Yishmaelim, which comes from Chesed, was never as harsh as the Golas under Remi, under Esav, Malchus Eden, was always harsher. The Golas basically under the Christians and the Romans and the Western world was much harsher for the Eden than all the years of the Golas under the Yishmaelim. Because Chesed, as Sof Kol Sof, even Chesed that goes the wrong direction completely, is still Chesed. And Gevurah, Helam, the Rebbe brings it in many different contexts. It's brought in Chassidus, even in Chinuch, when you say, Le'elam Yemin Mekareves, Smel Deche. So Yemin is Chesed, and Smel Deche is Gevurah. So Yemin Mekareves, you'll say, if you give too much Chesed to your student or to your child, you could spoil them. But remember the Rebbe once saying more than once in a Fabrengen, that the worst is you did too much Chesed. But if you do too much Gevurah, you actually can destroy a person. Gevurah means harshness. And if you judge someone too much and you're too disciplined, so too much Gevurah is going to always be more destructive than too much Chesed. Again, this doesn't mean Chesed doesn't need a balance. You need Chesed also. Yotzim Emenu Yishmael from Avram, so Chesed of Avram brought Yishmael. And Yishmael was no tzaddik, even though he did do tshuva. Esav, however, has far harsher implications. Yotz Memenu from Yitzchak. So you have the Chesed and Gevurah as two kavim, and just to sum up, the two kavim originate, as I said, in the highest levels, Yicholte Lahoyer, Shaloi Lahoyer, or later would become the Koyach HaGili and the Koyach HaHelam, and the language that the Alter Rebbe brings in Shayachad V'Amunah, that is the Koyach HaGili, Shemesh Mogan Hashem Elikim, that's Chesed, Gili, and then Hein Gvurah, that's the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is part of the Eibishter's Koyach. It says Hein Gvurah. The thing is, we, the Makablim, don't see that. You just see concealment. And the Moshel HaYadua, the famous example from the Magid that the Rebbe brings in many places, famous Sichel Tu B'Shvat Lametes, when the Rebbe was crying, Amish, one of the most crying Sichlis you'll ever hear, where the Rebbe brings the Moshel is what? That the father hides from his child in order that the child should, to elicit the ingenuity of the child, deeper koiches, they should find his father. What happened? The father hides himself so well that the child can't find him, and he looks and looks, and like the Rebbe said then, Zunti gesucht, Monti gesucht, Dinstig, he's looking on Sunday, but he can't find him, so he gives up. And then the Rebbe said the words, the strong words, he said, was it the king schuldig? The father hid himself so well. In other words, the Eibishter's Gevuras are very beautiful and very powerful. The Eibishter could hide himself quite well. And he hides himself so well that we get deceived into thinking that he's not there. You know, Im yesh alikim b'korbeinu imoyin, you could have that suffix. And the Gemara Tarka says, when Moshe Rabbeinu asked the Eibishter, how could you write in the Torah, Nasa Adam, Loshen Rabim? It'll create the impression that there's a duality, there's shit of Chaz v'Shalom. There's only Hashem Echad, what's Nasa? An interesting, strange answer the Gemara gives. Hareitz elitis ita, the Eibishter says. Those that want to make a mistake will make a mistake. So everyone asks the question, what is this? The Eibishter setting up for a mistake? So l'chatchila, write Asa Adam b'tzelem Elikim. Why does he have to write Nasa? To build in, exactly like concealing himself. So of course the answer ultimately is up Chassidus, because that's the way the Eibishter created a world of Helam, where you could make a mistake and convince yourself that you don't see Elikos. And therefore you could end up having your own life, and Ad Kadei Aniva Afsi Eid, instead of Ein Eid Mavadeh. Just to show where Gevurah can ultimately happen. The kavanah of the Gevurah is Tzimtzum B'Shvil HaGili. The whole point of it is in order to be Megal, that the child should find the father. That we in this Helam of Elam Haza, Elam Loshen Helam, especially the Helam of Golas, should do our effort and not buy into the concealment and look through it and dig until we find a Elikos. But it definitely gives to the potential for the opposite. And the more we feed into the opposite, the more the Helam gets stronger, obviously. When you convince yourself it's a Helam la'atzmei, it's not b'shvil ha'gila. Frierdiker Rebbe in a famous Maimer, Al Ken Yemer HaMoshlim Tafresh Sadik Aleph. One of the Yesedi's the Kamaimarim, there's the Maimer Bosel Lagani Tafshel Lamed Aleph is built on it somewhat. So it's kedai to run that Maimer whenever you have a chance. It's a very, Yesedi's the Kamaimer in the sense where he explains the Ishtalshlus, how from the Helam Lamaila, the Tzimtzum ultimately evolves Shviras HaKelim, and from Shviras HaKelim Miyat Talavona, and from Miyat Talavona Chet Eitzadas, and then from there the rest is history, of course. In other words, it all began with the Koyach Shalei Lahoya, which is a just as equal powerful Koyach, if not more powerful than Koyach Lahoya. However, it has this possibility that after Ribi Shtalshlus, ultimately it would lead to the Tzimtzum Harishin, which is also what the Eibishter wants. But the Frierdiker Rebbe says they're very strong Lashon. He says that the Tzimtzum itself is Hepech HaKavona. That's his Lashon, Hepech HaKavona. So of course, what do you mean? The Eibishter made the Tzimtzum. We didn't make it. You could say Chet, a sin is Hepech HaKavona. How could you say Tzimtzum is Hepech HaKavona? Because the Helam was never the Kavona. The Kavona was the Gili B'Shvil, Helam B'Shvil HaGili. So if Helam La'atzmei is not the Kavona, so Seser Amnas Livnes, not Seser La'atzmei, Chaz v'Shalom. And from that is Nishtalshel Shviras HaKelim in Teyu, and from that would come Miyat Talavona, the diminishment of the moon, and ultimately that was the source Lamaila for what would allow for the Chet Eitzadas. which of course is the first chet, like we all know from Basel Legani, Shir Hashirim Rabba, on Pasuk Basel Legani, that Ikar Shechina B'Tachteinu Moisa, there was Gili Lamato, and the chet, what created the first siluk, that the Shechina was nostalgic from Eretz to the Chirkiya Shvi. And then it could have been reversed, but it wasn't. And every generation after that, the stalkus or the concealment was deeper, all the way to the Rikiya Hadishin. And then came Avram, and what did he do? Hischil Ha'oyer. Avram came and began to bring back Oyer into this Cheshach. So from Rikiya Shvi to Shishi, and then Yitzchak, and all the way to Moshe Der Ashvi, the Medrash says, who brought the Shechina back by Matan Torah, or by the Mishkan, Lamata, as it was in the beginning of creation before Pri-Chet Tzadas. But obviously not permanently, gave the Koyach, and permanently will be lost at Lavi. So essentially all the Aved that we're doing right now is to be Megala in that place of Helam. Elikus, I just saw, I teach every morning, I in Beis, so there's a powerful Lashon on page in Chele Gimel, where he talks about Hamtokas HaGvuras. I'm saying it in context of Chesed and Gevurah. In Chele Gimel, I believe it's page 1319. So he says there, Kol Alzeh Nivne, Kol Yesed, Kol Ased Hatera Nivne, Al Yesed Shel Hamtokas HaGvuras Ayedei HaChsadim. That's what he says there. That the whole Yesod of Torah is Hamtokas HaGvuras Ayedei HaChsadim. And he explains, because the whole purpose of Torah mitzvahs is to be Megala, Chesed, the Gili Elikus, in a place of Helam, which is Din and Gevurah. And he goes there, the big arich is there about Hamtokas HaGvuras and Chsadim, which I'll talk about, but I'll talk about a little later, maybe this class or the next. So bottom line is, going back from the macrocosm to the microcosm, Chesed, Gevurah, Atzilus, which I was talking more specifically, 2 midas among all the 7 midas of the Eibishter and Atzilus, among the 10 Sefiros, is really a microcosm of these 2 kavim that reign supreme and define all the shtalshalos. The Koyach HaGili of Chesed, the Koyach HaGvurah of Helam. So sometimes the kav that's made after the tzimtzum is considered to be kav shel Chesed, chut shel Chesed, and the tzimtzum is Gevurah. Now it really begins with Eid Ein Sof, which is Chesed Lifnei tzimtzum. Then comes Gevurah. But then the order reverses. After the tzimtzum comes the kav, but the kav itself has to constantly work with a gili helam, like a regulator. Like I said before, gas and brakes. You could have a gili, but every gili has to be lefiyerach hakelim. And that's really what defines ishtalshalos. Every olam and every sfira is defined by lepochas v'leyeset. Who regulates it? The regulator, kav amida, is essentially enough is flowing. That's chesed, but there also has to be a helam, a tzimtzum, that regulates the flow, like a faucet. If there's no faucet, there's no regulator, it'll just either flood or it'll be missing, like you say, let's say like the blood that flows within our arteries and veins. So we may take it for granted, but the fact is it needs a perfect mix of chesed and gevurah. If the blood was too thin, Chman al-Islam, it could hemorrhage. If the blood was too thick, it could clot and create a stroke. Chman al-Islam. So you need a perfect balance that the blood is thick enough, but not too thick and thin enough. What keeps that regulation? That's part of the niflois habeda of how a healthy body works, that there's a chesed and gevurah balance. And wherever you look in life, everywhere is this. I mentioned before about water. We can't live without water. But too much water floods and can destroy things. So you have to have always the balance in relationships, whether it's husband and wife, whether it's children and parents, whether it's friends. There's always a chesed and gevurah dance and balance that's necessary for the harmony to be complete. Chesed is the giving part, the closeness. Gevurah is the boundaries, the space, and you must have both. There's no way you can exist without it. And everywhere you look, you start looking, you'll realize it's almost everywhere in Yiddishkeit you'll find somewhere a chesed and gevurah balance. Coming to Matan Torah, when the Eibishter said Aseres HaDibros, it says Al Kol Dibur Dibur Parcha Nishmosa. That's essentially overwhelming chesed, overwhelming them. And that's where the Eibishter Nital Shal Tchiyah to revive them. The Eden had to stand far. It says they should not stand close to the Mar Sinai. They can get hurt. This is always the call, boundaries. Havdalah between Shabbos L'Chel. Havdalah comes from Gevurah. But at the same time, the kavanah is Achdus. But you can't have a proper Achdus in a structured universe without proper boundaries. So you have the human body, is filled with millions and billions and trillions of cells, and yet everything has its space. For example, the food pipe and the windpipe are necessary to have a boundary. If, God forbid, the food gets into the windpipe, it's not good. Or the other way around. And wherever you look, you're going to see that the structure of existence, for anything to be a structure, it's Chesed and Gevurah. I once talked about this actually in a business conference, where they wanted to have business principles based on Chassidus and Kabbalah. So I brought this up and I said, in any business structure, you're going to see any businesses that are failing, whether in management or in implementing their goals, you'll see there's a Chesed and Gevurah problem. Sometimes the proper boundaries, people doing the same job, they shouldn't be doing the same job. They stop stepping on each other. They start stepping on each other. And so many different ways that you can use these principles that apply to so many areas in life. So this is like some practical applications, even in the Chel. Now for sure in Kedusha, Chesed and Gevurah is a yesod of everything. Chesed, the Alter Rebbe says, in Tanya Chesed, the midah of Chesed is Ava, the midah of Gevurah is Yirah. Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem. The shadish of all positive mitzvahs, Ramach mitzvah says is Ava Chesed, and the shadish of all mitzvahs Leisa says Gevurah is Gevurah, is Yirah, which is Gevurah, and that's the yesod, Chesed and Gevurah. Eish dos lamed, that Torah is both, and you need that balance. Another physical example of the two is often you find Chesed is compared to Mayim, and Gevurah to Eish, and it's exactly that. What does Mayim do? Mayim yerdim emakim gavayel emakim namuch. Like I said before, a flow. Eish is the exact opposite. It rises. That's the difference. Because Chesed is a hamshach, is a hashpah, and Gevurah is withholding. It's internal, so it rises up. Mamata lamayla. Chesed is mamayla lamat. Another thing is that water makes things expand, and fire makes things crumple up. You put a piece of paper in fire, you see it rolls up, because it's symptom. It causes everything to contract, essentially. So Mayim and Eish, Lamata obviously is not they're Gashmistic entities, but like everything Lamata has a Ruchnistic Shadish. So Chesed and Gevurah is the Shadish for Mayim and Eish. You say Ava Kamayim or Ava Kadish Be Eish. Again, there's two types of love. There's a love that is calm like water, and there's a love that burns passionately like fire. So there's the Eish of the Ava of Chesed and the Ava of Gevurah. There's many, many more applications. I can go on and on, just giving some examples that just help put things into context. Another thing I wanted to add is this. Sometimes you'll see in Chassidus, which confuses many. It confused me, at least when I learned it the first time. And I hear a lot of people ask this question. Sometimes Chassidus suddenly turns around and says that Gevurah has a mile over Chesed, not just the mile of Helam over Gili, like I mentioned, but Tagbeiras Achayis. That Gevurah is intensity. Now, Tagbeiras Achayis sounds more intense and more Chesed than Chesed is. No, Chesed would be, let's say, you're pushing something with a certain strength. Tagbeiras Achayis is you're using a lot of strength. So when you push something with a lot of strength, is it Chesed or is it Gevurah? Because on one hand, pushing something, like let's say hashpah, you want to give somebody love, you want to give somebody tzedakah, and you do it, okay, you do it with a certain measure, giving them $100. But then there's the Tagbeiras Achayis, you have a surge of energy, you want to give them $1,000. Is that a Chesed thing or a Gevurah thing? So Gevurah has Tzimtzum and Din, it's not, because Tzimtzum and Din is Magbil, is limiting. It's like a person would limit and make a cheshbon. They wouldn't just, a giving person doesn't make cheshbonis. But on the other hand, Chassidus does talk about that when you have Tagbeiras Achayis, a certain surge of energy, that comes from Gevurah. Because Gevurah also has the meaning of strength. So you could have, essentially, Gevurah can make Chesed stronger than Chesed is. So the key thing to remember here is that's not really a stira. Because in Shadish and Yonim, as I said before, Siyod l'chach mishtike, from the point of view of the mashpia, it takes more strength to withhold than to give. I'm not talking about a person who's a stingy person who's we're talking about a person, a healthy person who's al pi Torah. And if the Torah tells him that now do not show chesed, it's harder for him than to show chesed. Because a good, kind person, is very hard for him not to be kind. But if for whatever reason he's told to restrain himself, and I'm not saying chas v'shalom to be the opposite, just that he can't let, like I said before, let me a simple example. You're all young couples and young families, but one day your children will get a little older, mitzvah Hashem, and you see they're making a mistake. You have an adult child, 20 years old, and they're making a mistake. You see they're making a mistake in the choice they make. But they're adults at this point, they're not going to necessarily listen to you. So there are parents who put their foot down, and they say, this is what I want you to do, and either they get into a fight, or even if they win, the parent, it doesn't leave a good taste, because it creates this, because at some point this child is going to become older and they won't listen. It's one of the hardest things for a parent when you see someone you love doing something that you think is wrong, to control yourself. But sometimes that's what you need to do. I could show you letters from the Rebbe, where the Rebbe tells parents, you have to let them learn from their own mistakes. We're not talking about chas v'shalom, rachmana litzlan, l'fnei iver le'sit michshel. Someone's about to do something that's life-threatening. Obviously, then you do whatever you have to do. But we're talking about choices people make. Because the fact is, when a child begins to walk, there's no way you can walk if you don't fall. So a parent will have so much rachmanas on the child and say, you know what, I don't want my child to ever fall. My child's not going to fall. What do you think is going to happen? You hold your child up. Every time your child will never learn to walk on their own. God forbid. You stand there and you show the child, hey, I'm here for you. Take a step. Walk toward me. You want to empower them that they should do it on their own. Why am I saying this? Because Gevurah takes a lot more energy and more effort than Chesed. The only thing is, the Gevurah is behelim. You don't see how much effort. I was just, by a Shiva call, someone told me, I never appreciated my mother, because now I look back, I'm a mother myself, and I see how much restraint she exercised. You don't see, most of what your parents do for you, you don't see. What you see is a part of it. They support you, they help you. I'm talking about, obviously healthy parents, but the things they don't do, which the things they stay up at night, or the things that you don't see are far more powerful than the things you see. If you look at a tree, the most powerful part of the tree are the roots under the ground. So the things so Gevurah's power is tagberis, is behelim, that's the thing. For the Eibishter's chofetz chesed, it's much easier to do chesed, kavyochel, than to do Gevurah. Kemuvin, for the Eibishter, Gevurah and chesed are equal. So just a dugma. But the point is, it takes more energy to withhold than to give. So the truth is, when you're able to, let's call it release, and free, the energy within Gevurah is going to be a lot more powerful than Chesed. That's why you see, Chassidus gives the example of Gevurah and Chesed as what? A dam. Let's say water is Chesed. Water is running down a river. Okay, it's running a certain pace, 10 miles an hour, 5 miles an hour, whatever it is. Build a dam, resistance, build a wall. What do you think will happen? The water starts building up, building up, building up. This is a mashal Chassidus in a number of places. And then what happens? The water creates so much intensity that, first of all, today we have partial water energy just from that. And then when it breaks through the dam, it's so powerful, it could be like from 10 miles an hour, it can suddenly be like 1,000 miles an hour, or however they measure water power. And not only that, Chassidus sometimes brings, not only does it break through the dam, that the dam itself becomes part of the flow. The stones of the wall also become part of the flow. So what caused the chesed to suddenly be so powerful? It was the resistance. Now when you're seeing the resistance, you don't see it. You don't see the power of the wall. You see the water. But then when it does get revealed, it's just tremendous. It's not even be'erach. So the truth is, it's not a stira. The tagberes achayis of Gevurah comes from the tremendous keach of helim that's just concealed. That is withholding. Just psychologically speaking, for example, when people, unfortunately, they suffer trauma or they suffer loss, God forbid, and they have a lot of pain inside, and they never expressed it to anyone. So you'd think, okay, they're very much in control, everything is nice. The truth is, the secrets you carry and the pain you carry is far more powerful than when you express it. Because when you express it, at least it's like, think of a kettle. You know, kettle, you're boiling water, you want to make tea. You're boiling water. Imagine the kettle didn't have a spout. What would happen? It would implode, it would explode at some point. So the idea of expressing yourself, like the Gemara says, Im yidag lev adam yasecheno, that person should speak, or the other Pirush is hes chadas, the Marash is metavach, that when you speak, you're able to free yourself, and therefore you can distract yourself from it. But the ability to express is actually very freeing. When a person holds everything in, like a dam, what builds up inside is so much tension that nobody sees it, but it's inside. It can drive a person completely crazy. It could turn a person into so many things psychologically. And this is part of being trained. When you see somebody, you could tell, those that are trained can tell that inside they're carrying tremendous amount of pain. Even though on the outside everything seems in control and everything is nice. Because the koyach ha'helam is much more powerful than the koyach ha'gili. However, its surah is ba'ef shel helam. So Gevurah has that as well. In that koyach hadin, in that koyach hasimson, there's tremendous power. When it's harnessed, when it's released, it can create tremendous koyach l'mal yusa. Not just a Gevurah. I'll just conclude. I saw the famous letter from the Rabbi to about Tzivus Hashem, when the Rebbe established Tzivus Hashem. So there was those that had tinus. The Rebbe got letters from all kinds of individuals. The model for Eden was always Rabbi Akiva, not Bar Kochva. Why are we suddenly making a model of soldiers and army? Tzivus Hashem. The model was always Teirah, Darkei Sholem. Here teaching children military tactics and everything with military symbolism and so on. And the Rebbe has a beautiful letter, how he thought about it, and the contrary. It's about Tzivus Hashem, not Tzivus, we're not talking about war, we're talking about Ruchnis. But the end of the letter is an interesting paragraph. The Rebbe says another benefit is that there are children that are by nature more aggressive. So the Gemara says that when a person is aggressive in Shabbos, so it can come from Mazel Maidim, so he could end up being either a Sheikhet or a Moel, or he could be a Shefer Dam, a murderer, a Ritzeach. So the Rebbe said that to Tzivus Hashem, because it does have certain elements of military symbolism, it could help channel those children that have aggression, Gevurah, basically, channel it toward Kedusha. Because aggression could also be used in good ways. It doesn't have to be used necessarily in negative ways. I just thought it was an interesting way that Rebbe applied that you can use Tagberes Achayis of Gevurah toward Kedusha things, and then of course, it's on the contrary, it becomes part of the Kedusha. So this is an overview. I'm going to talk more about this. I see we need more time. So I'll do next week. I'll go into some elements of Midas HaGevurah or Sefiros HaGevurah. So this covers more or less the general subject, at least in the two kavim, Chesed and Gevurah, Helam and Gilui, and all the different aspects. So everyone have a good day.